Today we're pitching two legendary Rolls-Royce saloons. The first up, the Silver Shadow, introduced in 1965, the car that brought the brand into the modern post-war era. And then there's this, the Silver Spirit, which came out in 1980 to replace the Silver Shadow. Both cars have an awful lot in common, and they're also both very affordable ways into the marque. But what are they like to drive today? Well, we're going to compare these two wonderful examples, drive them side by side and see what they're like. So welcome to the Silver Shadow, Rolls-Royce's radical new saloon, introduced at the Earls Court Motor Show in 1965. A real radical departure for Rolls-Royce. This was the modern post-war era for the brand. Had a tough job of replacing the much revered Silver Cloud, which is still very much reminiscent of Rolls-Royce as a coach builder as well as a car maker. So to that end, the Silver Shadow is the company's first unitary construction, the first three-box design. It had independent rear suspension. It was actually narrower and shorter than the Silver Cloud that it replaced. Bearing in mind this is part of an era of the post-motorway. This is very much a time where motoring was becoming more democratic. People were using cars more than they were using trains. Yeah, the Silver Shadow was 3.5 inches narrower and 7 inches shorter than the Silver Cloud that it replaced, and yet it still got this lovely, imposing, imperious design. They licensed the self-leveling suspension from Citroen, and albeit then heavily re-engineered it for the Rolls-Royce application. That clever hydraulics was also what powered the brakes, and the subframes were also a very complex arrangement, sort of insulated subframes that were attached to the chassis by some sort of wire mesh fibre shock, I think it was called. I mean, ultimately that was all replaced by regular rubber mounts by 1972, I think it was. But nonetheless, it was clear that what they were trying to do is make a car that was still effortlessly comfortable, imperious in its ride comfort. So it didn't matter whether you were driving or being passengered from the rear. This was still a relaxed, comfortable, long-distance cruiser. From launch, it still had the same 6.2 V8 from the Silver Cloud, but it was uprated to 6.7 by 1970, at a 3-speed automatic gearbox. And then the Silver Shadow just very gradually, gently evolved over its 15-year life. A long wheelbase model was introduced in 1969, and that was rebadged the Silver Wraith come 1977 when the Series 2 came out. And of course, during the lifetime of the Silver Shadow, Rolls-Royce itself went through some difficult times. The aviation business actually went bust in 1971, and while technically that didn't impact the car business, you can't help but feel that would have at least been some form of distraction. And indeed, the car company itself was sold off in 1973. And that undoubtedly delayed the introduction of a replacement for the Silver Shadow, which was probably originally chalked in for 1975, 10 years after the launch. So the Series 2 Silver Shadow that comes along in 1977 is no surprise. It's probably just an ability to extend the model's life that bit longer while the company figured out what to do with its ultimate replacement. And the Silver Shadow 2 is recognisable by its plastic bumpers, its deep spoiler and twin fog lights. So it's more a visual encapsulation of the improvements that had happened in the sort of 12 years or so since launch. And well, what's it like to drive? Well, we're about to go around a corner so we can find out. It rolls like a Rolls. Here we go. I mean, there's no doubt about it. This wallows and pitches, but it's so sublimely comfortable. It's absolutely gorgeous. The V8 engine is such a lovely unit. It's so silky, it's so smooth. There's a sort of deep, purposeful kind of rumble, a roar, but it's not invasive, it's not obtrusive, it's just lovely. It works. It's so appropriate to this car and what it intends to be. The steering is light and it lacks any sort of feel. You get so much articulation through the wheel without it doing anything. This is definitely not a point and shoot sports saloon for sure. It was never designed as thus, so we shouldn't be too surprised that it is. The road noise is non-existent. If anything, the only thing that shows this car's age is the wind noise through the A-pillar here. But other than that, it's it's peerless. It really is. And of course, you've just got that acres of bonnet, that sort of beading down the middle, which leads down to the Spirit of Ecstasy at the front there. There's something the Silver Spirit continues with, of course. It's worth saying they obviously were doing something right, because the way the Silver Shadow evolved into that Series 2 model in 1977, it was that car, heavily reskinned, that eventually led to the Silver Spirit in 1980. To all intents and purposes, that just highlights just quite how sophisticated and advanced the car was in 1965, because the fundamental architecture, the engineering beneath it, powered all Silver Shadows and Silver Spirits from 1965 all the way up to 1998. Over 30 years worth of Rolls-Royce history encapsulated in these two cars. And while I've always got a soft spot for the Silver Spirit, I'm very much a child of the 80s and how I remember it, it's probably the Silver Shadow that's the most iconic. The archetypal wedding car, the car that chauffeured the rich and the famous. So I guess the question is, how well does the Silver Spirit live up to that tradition that was created by the Silver Shadow in 1965? Well, let's go and jump in that newer car and find out. So here we are in the Silver Spirit, the SZ generation Rolls-Royce saloon that replaced that iconic Silver Shadow in 1980. And while it obviously looks different, it's got a much squarer jawed styling, perhaps very much in keeping with the era in which it was launched. It's fundamentally a Silver Shadow 2 underneath. The suspension was largely carried over, albeit with a few minor tweaks. It's the same engine, it's the same gearbox, so very much the same car, just with an updated look, but still very much in keeping with Rolls-Royce and its brand values. And from launch in 1980 right up until 1998, when it was replaced by the Silver Seraph, the car just steadily evolved. It got steadily better and better, which is kind of what you would expect from Rolls-Royce. No radical changes at any one time, just incremental improvements. And it was launched, the list price was £49,000. That's over £300,000 in today's money. That seemed almost unthinkable, but when you're bemoaning the value of a modern Rolls-Royce, just think about that in context of the Silver Spirit. Come 1987, the Silver Spirit was kind of heavily revised, really, and the car that you see post 87 is quite a bit different to the one before then. And in fact, this is a 1986 car, so it's one of the last of the early generation Silver Spirits. And there was a further update in 1989 when technically the Silver Spirit 2 became available. What you see in there is a revised dashboard, revised materials. There was Bosch Motronic fuel injection, an adaptive damping system, automatic ride control as it was called. And then from 1992, the 3-speed auto was replaced by a 4-speed auto. And then in 1993, the V8 engine got further refinements, which saw power increase. So a really steady evolution of the car between 1980 and 1998. So let's go back to that styling. Well, what do we think? Well, it lacks the graceful curves of the Silver Shadow, but there's no doubt the proportions are really elegant. It has all of those things that you would expect. It's really imposing. It's got this lovely pronounced bonnet with the vein down the front leading down to the Spirit of Ecstasy. And yeah, it looks very imposing, very graceful, very regal. So it's probably very much a subjective matter as to which car you prefer from a styling perspective. But as a child of the 80s, I've got to say I've got a soft spot for the Silver Spirit. It may lack the elegance of the Silver Shadow, but I do love the square cut lines of the Silver Spirit. And what's it like to drive? Well, as you could expect, it's peerless in many ways. It's so lovely to drive, effortlessly refined. Rolls-Royce were always really coy about the power output of the V8 engine, 6.75 litres by the time you get to the Silver Spirit, always describing it as adequate. It's probably producing in sort of the high 200 horsepower by this point, but it's probably more about the torque that matters. It's just so graceful. Power delivery is smooth, effortless. If you want to put your foot down, There's a kind of muted burble from that V8. It's quite floaty, but that's kind of what you'd expect from a Rolls-Royce. The brakes are responsive. They're a lovely soft cushioned pedal feel, but the brakes do pull up really nicely and sharp. You can tell this has been a well-maintained example that we're driving here. It's only got 34,000 miles on the clock, and it's just effortless. You've got rack and pinion power assisted steering by this point, and there's an awful lot of wheel movement there before anything happens, and it's very light. So the Silver Spirit is, I think, very much an authentic replacement for the Silver Shadow. It did everything that the Silver Shadow 2 did, but just did it that little bit better. And the Silver Spirit to this day remains probably the most accessible point if you want to get into a Rolls-Royce. I saw one for sale recently for less than £4,000. Now, you'd want to take a dose of brave pills for that kind of thing, but the good news is, as long as you've got a deep wallet and lots of patience, that £4,000 Rolls-Royce is entirely fixable. There's some fantastic club support. We're here today with the Rolls-Royce Enthusiast Club, and the level of support and technical expertise and guidance that you can get from the club and its members is second to none. And there are a plethora of enthusiasts and specialist businesses that can help you out and give you the guidance that you need. Inside here, again, this is the pre-facelift dashboard, so it lacks a lot of the electronics and the bigger center console of the Series 2 Spirits from '89 onwards, but it's still an absolutely glorious interior. The wood veneer, it's not just about the amount of wood that's here, but the sheer quality of it. It's so a rich, deep burr walnut. It's absolutely glorious. The gauges are big and purposeful, like some sort of Spitfire or something, and all the switch gear is quite, I don't know, traditional, thick, good quality. I don't know, it feels like you're tuning a grandfather clock or something. It's just lovely. And the steering wheel, while it's quite thin rimmed by modern standards, it's beautifully elegant. It's this lovely leather stitched steering wheel. And these seats, of course, lovely piped seats. It's just wonderful. They're really flat, so it doesn't matter how big you are, you'll fit nicely in here. There's a fair bit of space. I mean, I'm obviously not the tallest, but I fit in here fine. But yeah, you feel very relaxed driving it. It's not a difficult car to drive, apart from its overall size, of course. But of course, come 1998, it's replaced by the Silver Seraph, a very kind of heavily BMW 7 Series derived luxury saloon. And there's nothing wrong with the Silver Seraph, but for me, it definitely lacked some of that specialness, that coach-built quality that I think the Silver Shadow and the Spirit possess in abundance. So, I don't know, the Silver Spirit for me represents the last of that independent era for Rolls-Royce, the time when it perhaps could hold its hand up as a truly independent car maker, a maker of distinctive cars, of quality cars. And of course, it's been thanks to BMW's custodianship over the years that it has turned into a very successful global brand. But I think it has, to some extent, lost some of that character. So the Silver Spirit marks, for me, an end of an era. And it's an era that I'll fondly remember with Rolls-Royce. It's the car I probably most associate with Rolls-Royce as a brand. And it's stunning, spectacular. Well, I've certainly had worse days, but what an experience that was. Two iconic Rolls-Royce saloons, the Silver Shadow of '65 and the Silver Spirit of 1980. Choosing a winner is almost irrelevant. It doesn't matter. That obviously you would expect the newer car to be better in so many ways, and of course it is. It's evolution, and that's what you notice about these cars. They just steadily evolved from the 65 original through to the Series 2 of '77, through to this in 1980, and then this was heavily facelifted in '89, and the car just gets better and better. But for me, both of these cars represent kind of a peak post-war era for Rolls-Royce, the last models that came out as an independent owned car company. And I just think they're such stunning representations of Rolls-Royce as a brand. So it'd be really interesting to know what you guys think. Do put in the comments which one perhaps you'd prefer gracing your driveway. But in the meantime, thanks ever so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you again soon. and I don't know where I am now. I think I might have to stop here.